The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 972, coming to you on Monday the 4th of May, 2020. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic, homemade wills. But before getting into the topic, a few preliminary comments beginning, as usual, with condolences. And I send out condolences to all families which have suffered recent bereavements, especially the family of that policeman who was shot and killed in Camden Park. I would also like to express my condolences to my wife, Juliet, on the passing of one of her elder brothers, Pastor Gideon Robinson, formerly of Murray's Village, the founder of Revival Center Church. He passed abroad, and I would also like to express my deepest condolences to my sister, my Christian sister, Elizabeth Harry, from Upper Fair Hall, or Lower Southwell if you will, whose husband brother Emil Harry, was a member of St. Elizabeth Spiritual Baptist Church at Belmont. He passed recently, and my deepest condolences go out to Sister Harry and all the members of the family. On a lighter note, last week, by a slip of the tongue, I sent out congratulations, first anniversary congratulations, to my daughter Mandela and her husband Elvin. And I said that they got married last year on the 27th of April, 1919. My mouth totally slipped. So I send apologies to Mandy and Elvin. Of course, it was 2019 that you got married and not 19. That would have made your marriage the longest one in the history of marriage, probably in the world. Okay, I'm sure you've forgiven me. But the family didn't let me live that down for the early part of last week. So, but I know you all had a good time, and may you all wish that you all live to see, as the people say, many and many more anniversaries to come, to use a phrase that is firmly part of the Vincentian lexicon. And the final preliminary remark, the virus, the COVID-19 virus. President Trump calls it the plague. I call it the pestilence. Still very much with us, but one is heartened to see the numbers are still reasonably low in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the rest of the Eastern Caribbean generally. Relatively low numbers, but it has wrecked the economies of, well, practically the world, especially in the Caribbean, those territories which are heavily dependent on tourism. the tourism industry has been practically closed down. Cruise ships stopped plying the waters, airplanes stopped flying the skies. Let us hope that it would not be long before things get back to what they call the new normal, because life would never be the same in any part of the world because of the virus. The scientists tell us, at least the most credible scientists, so that this virus is likely to be around for a long time. And we would hope and pray that the good Lord will enlighten the research scientists who are searching avidly for a cure, a vaccine for this virus. In the meantime, let us continue to be sensible, do the sensible things, do all the instructions and advice we've been given by the authorities: hygiene, wearing our masks, observing spacing. I know there are some things for which we Vincentians like to jam up and push and shove, particularly these last couple of days. There are lively crowds around the lotto booths. Well, that will soon pass. But we must observe all the advice we've been given by the authorities, okay? All right. Homemade wills. Well, when I say homemade wills, I refer to wills made at home, but not necessarily in the house of the person who has made it. I mean, any will that is made by a person other than a qualified lawyer. So, a will made by a justice of the peace or police sergeant or a headmaster that hasn't passed through the hands of a qualified lawyer would come within my definition of homemade wills. Wills are supposed to conform to certain strict formalities in order for a will to be valid. And there are basic ingredients of a good will. First of all, the will ought to name an executor or executrix. That is, somebody who is given the responsibility of taking charge of the estate of the testator when the testator dies and distributing it in accordance with the wishes of the testator. And everybody knows by now, testator is the name of a person who makes a will. If it is a man, if it is a woman, we say testatrix, T-R-I-X. But for the rest of the program, I will continue to say testator, and an executor is the male, the female equivalent is executrix. But I will continue to say executor, but I mean to include the feminine in that, okay? So, a will must name an executor. Secondly, the will must be dated. This is a must because it's the last will made by an executor or made by a testator, which is valid if there are several wills made by somebody during his or her lifetime. So the will ought to have a date. So made by a testator naming an executor, must have a date. It must identify very clearly either the property to which it refers or by the use of words that would enable anyone to determine what property the will encompasses. And fundamentally, a will must be witnessed by at least two independent witnesses. It must be signed by the testator, but somebody can sign for the testator if the testator is unable to sign his name. Come to that in a moment. But the will must be witnessed by two persons, preferably neither of whom should be a beneficiary under the will. In other words, if somebody is getting something from the will, some part of the property left by the testator, is not a good practice for that person to be a witness. Not that it totally invalidates the will, except in some circumstances, but it is better if somebody is named in the will as somebody who is getting something from the estate of the deceased person. It's better that that person is not used as a witness. The person can be the same person who is the executor of the will, can be a beneficiary under the will. Nothing wrong with that. So let us start from the top. A will is a document in writing. There is no such thing as an oral will. Even if expressed orally, say for somebody on their deathbed, someone has to reduce it to writing, put down what the testator is saying on a piece of paper. Because the whole process of probating a will means proving that that was the last will and testament of the deceased person and that it was valid in all legal respects. Now, if you go to a lawyer, you call a lawyer in to make a will, the lawyer will know all of that because it's part of our training. But I'm referring to cases where people do not involve a lawyer in the preparation of the will. They do it by themselves. Now, there are some justices of the peace who are extremely knowledgeable and experienced. They know what they're doing. And they know everything that I'm telling you about. Very experienced and very, very knowledgeable. Persons like that don't need me to tell them how to make a will. But there are some justices of the peace who are not so well experienced, not so knowledgeable. And if a justice of the peace knows that he or she is not thoroughly familiar with the process of making a will, and he or she is requested by a testator or by a relative, testator might be really, really very sick, bedridden, a justice of the peace is requested, look, Daddy is in bed, he is slipping, and he wants you to come because he wants a will made. If that justice of the peace to whom that request is made knows that he or she is not thoroughly familiar with the process of making a will, the justice of the peace should seek to encourage the parties to get a lawyer Now, time may not permit. It may be an emergency. This thing may happen on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning when you can't find a lawyer with open offices. So in an emergency, a justice of the peace or any other person who knows the parties can try their best. But if time permits at all, it is always better to get a lawyer to make the will. According to the rules that we have in the legal profession pertaining to fees, a basic will is about $450. That is a will that is not complicated at all. And it is far better to spend the $450 and get the thing properly done than to roast up something in an effort to save the legal fees, and then when the testator dies, you have trouble with the will, and then you have to go to a lawyer to get the lawyer to sort matters out. If the will isn't clear, I mean, lawyers are accustomed to people coming to them with a will, a homemade will that doesn't name an executor, and the lawyer has to explain to them, well, look, we have to use a different process than probate. We have to apply for letters of administration with the will annexed, and so on and so forth. The will may not have the date, may not be witnessed by two persons. One of the witnesses may be disqualified from being a witness to that particular will. So all sorts of things can go wrong. Now, because a will has to be in writing, there's a basic requirement that the writing should be legible. Hasn't got to be typed, but if a will is written out in longhand, one has to be able to read the will and make out the words. Because if the will cannot be read, if you can't make out words and crucial words in a will, there may be what is called ambiguity in the will, which again may have to go to court, may have to go before the judge for a determination as to what it is that the testator was trying to say. In other words, a testator might make the will himself or herself, and the handwriting may not be such that you can understand everything that is being written on the paper. So you may say, okay, there's a will made. It is signed by the testator. It is witnessed. But what does it say? You can read some parts of it, other parts of it you can't read. Horrors. And if a testator has the strength to sit up and write out a will, then clearly he must have the strength to ask somebody to go, look, get a lawyer for me and bring the lawyer. If he can't leave home, bring the lawyer. But the testator might be a penny pinching person and say, look, we ain't going to spend no money on lawyers. Them lawyers is charged too much, and blah, blah. You end up costing the family or the persons you leave as the beneficiaries much more than if you had sent for a lawyer and have the thing done properly. So I'm saying, in an effort to save a few dollars, you may have something which is we could refer to as a roast-up. You know, not a proper will that can be certified by the registrar as legible, clear, and complying with the formalities of making a will. Now, some lawyers, and I am one of them, if a client comes to our chambers, say an old person, with relatives, children, brothers, sisters, and say they come to make a will, once the person is capable of understanding what they're doing, I usually, and most lawyers will usually tell the relatives, look, you stay outside in the general office. Let me speak to the person himself who is going to make the will. Because a lot of elderly people are pressured by children and others to make a will leaving this or that for them, so that they're being unfair to other members of the family who would have deserved to have something left for them as well. So lawyers are always on the lookout for that sort of thing. You want to make sure that a will expresses the wishes of the testator without undue influence, without pressure. There are cases where the people take an old person, carry him or her to a lawyer, almost lift him to go in the lawyer's office, go in the room with him and want to practically tell the lawyer what their daddy wants in the will, or the granny or grandpa or grandma, what to put in the will. No, experienced lawyers don't allow that to happen at all. Experienced lawyers will want to ask the elderly person what is it they really want. And if they say, look, I want to leave, I have, 8 children, but I want to leave the property just to one child. An experienced lawyer will want to know, well, why? How come you're not leaving something for the other children? Because the one child may have brought a lot of pressure to bear on the old person. And say, Daddy, I want you to put this in my name, because of so and so and so and so. And a lot of elderly persons are vulnerable. They are weak. They can't take the headache. They might have children who don't get along, and the old people have just reached this stage, they just want to die and get out of this world and leave confusion behind. Because one child may be just harassing them, as the old people say, harassing this whole case. So lawyers have to be careful when that happens. But that is when the lawyer has an input into the will. But homemade wills don't have the benefit of legal advice by a lawyer for the testator. So in the system, when a will goes to probate, one is always very careful to make sure that when a will comes made by a non-lawyer, one is very careful, and they're certainly very careful at the probate registry to make sure that everything is okay, prim and proper as far as that will is concerned. Now, the final thing I want to leave with you. In some countries, some members of the family can challenge what is in a will on the ground that the will doesn't make sufficient provision for them. That is, in some countries, if a will is made and say everything is left to children and nothing to the wife can go to court and challenge the will and say, no, look, I am the wife, I am entitled to something. And that challenge could succeed. But in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have what is called the freedom of testamentary disposition. That is, in this country, you are free to leave what is yours to whomsoever you want. There is no obligation for you to leave anything in a will for anybody just because they are related to you. If you owe them something, that's a different story. But in St. Vincent and Grenadines, parents, for example, and have children, they don't have to leave anything to any particular child. They could cut that child totally out of the will. Just ignore them. Don't put their name down in the will as somebody who is supposed to get. And you cannot go to court in this country and say, I should have got something out of my grandfather's will, out of my father's will, out of my mother's will, and she didn't leave anything for me. And she ought to have left me something. You can do that in Barbados, Trinidad, I know for sure, I think Jamaica, and one or two other territories in the Caribbean. You can challenge wills in those countries for not leaving something for you if you legally deserve to be left something, but not in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You can challenge your will on other grounds, but not on the ground that you were left out of the will and you are closely related to the testator and now he is deceased. You notice there's nothing for you in the will. You can't make that challenge in this country. And finally, if you are making a will at home, make sure that names of beneficiaries are spelled out clearly. Don't use nicknames. And it is better to get the ID cards if somebody has children. Get the ID cards, because very often the name a person uses generally is not the name on the ID card. And there may be a difficulty in deciding who a name on the will really refers to. So let me sum up by saying, it is always better, if circumstances permit, for a person who wishes to make a will to go and see a lawyer or send for a lawyer. But if the circumstances don't permit that to be done, then whosoever undertakes the responsibility to assist the testator in making the will should know what they are doing. Otherwise, you will end up in court, which is spending more money on lawyers. Same lawyers you didn't want to spend money on to make the thing done properly, you'll end up spending money on them to go to court to unravel a knotty problem. All right? All right, well, that is all from this program of the Law and You, program number 972. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday evening, for another presentation in this public service nation building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls. Observe your COVID precautions, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel R. Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.